Last night when we were watching the news, I don't know if you saw it or not, Barbara Bush had her ceremony yesterday. And Jeb Bush got up and spoke and things, and Judy was saying, I wonder what our kids would say about us. You know, it's an interesting perspective. What is it that you leave in this life? What is it that as you spend your time here, people will remember? Well, this month we've been reading through the book of Judges. Hopefully you're following that schedule along the back of your bulletin, the bottom of the page there, and that will get you through the entire book of Judges. You can catch up. We'll be moving on to a different book in a couple weeks, the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. But the book of Judges is one of those books. You look at the lives of people and you see what was written about them and you think, wow, what was that all about? Why is that guy there? Why in the world did we need to know that? Or why did he do this? And all these things. And you wonder sometimes, what in the world is going on? Just what are we supposed to get from this? I was doing some reading this week. I like to read this guy's perspective on this. I appreciate what he had to say. He said this: the stories in Judges aren't exactly what you'd call a list of who's who in purity and sainthood. In fact, many of their antics and attitudes make you think of the Saturday night crowd at the county jail rather than the Sunday morning crowd at church. With what few halos there are among them could use a bit of straightening and polish. Yet strange as it may seem, it is their flaws, failures, and faults that makes them refreshing. They may have had flaws of biblical proportions, but thankfully, God uses imperfect people. No matter who you are or where you're from, God can do surprising things through you. And that's so true. And today we're going to look at the last person we're going to look at in the book of Judges. And it's a guy that you've probably never heard of before. Maybe you have, and probably you don't know much about him. And to be honest with you, I'd forgot that he appears in the New Testament. He makes his appearance in the New Testament in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, which is known as kind of the Hall of Fame faith chapter. There's where you hear all the stories. You're reminded of the great stories of the great faith of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and all the biggies of the Bible. But down in chapter 11, verses 32 through 35, we find these words after all these stories about all these guys. And what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. All four of those are judges found in the book of Judges, by the way. David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword. And here's what I like about this passage. It said, whose weaknesses was turned to strength, who became powerful in battle and routed by foreign armies. And one of those guys in that list there, or the guy we're going to look at today, that you may never heard of, his name is Jephthah. Jephthah, right there along with Gideon, we looked at the last 2 weeks, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. Lies that little known man by the name of Jephthah. Why in the world would he be mentioned in this chapter with all those other people? Well, his story is found in Judges chapter 11. And that's where we're going to spend some time today. I'm going to put the first 3 verses up on the screen, and then the rest of the references are there. Hopefully you'll open your Bible and you'll follow along. Here's how it goes. Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. You are not going to get any inheritance in our family, they said, because you are the son of another woman. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where a group of adventurers gathered around him and followed him. Now, is there anything in those verses that you think that Jephthah may not have included on his resume when applying to be the leader of Israel? Probably a couple of things jumped out. He was the son of a prostitute. Gilead had this encounter with this prostitute, and Jephthah was the result of that. Well, when he grew up, his brothers didn't think too highly of that. They said, get out of here. You're not going to get a penny of this inheritance. We don't even count you as being part of the family. So Jephthah left, went to another land to live. It says there he gathered around him a group of people and we don't know exactly what they did. We don't know if they were bandits. We don't know if they were like mercenaries. They hired themselves to fight in other armies. We just don't know. But something about Jephthah, though, made him seem like he was a leader among people, because he had these people gathered around him. So that's Jephthah's beginning. Not the best thing that you could say, as he would look at his heritage and say, look at my life, I'm so happy that I grew up like this. I'm so happy that my brothers loved me the way they did. No, none of that. Well, his story goes on down in verses 4 through 6. Sometime later, when the Ammonites made war on Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. Now, I'm going to make an assumption here that some of those elders were some of those brothers, because later on, Jephthah refers back to something that only his brothers would have known. The elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. Come, they said, be our commander so that we can fight the Ammonites. So once again, we had that pattern in Judges. The people forgot God. A foreign country came and oppressed them. The people say, we're in a mess here. We need some help. And God raises up someone to lead them against their oppressors. Now, what's interesting about Jephthah and his story is that he didn't rally the troops, get the battles together, and go attack. He actually first sent a delegation to the Ammonites and said, what is going on here? What's up? And the Ammonites said, well, it's very simple. We want our land back. You guys came in and took our land from us when you came into this land, and we would like to have it back, please. And Jephthah said, basically, make a long story short, no, you've got the story wrong. And he recounted kind of a history lesson of how they came into the land and how God had protected them under God. And he ends up the story basically by saying, look, God gave us this land. You have your God, Chemosh. You occupy the land your God gives you. We'll occupy the land our God gives you. And he pitted the two against each other. And obviously, God of Israel, the only true God, is the one that came out on top. Now, what was interesting is when they come to him and say, we're in a mess. We need your help. Would you come and lead us? There could have been several responses to that question. If you were Jephthah, what would you say? Don't let the door hit you on the way out, guys. You want me to do what? And he does remind them. He says to them, look, aren't you guys that hated me and ran me out of town? And now you want me to come back and be your leader? You've got to be kidding. I might as well go join the Ammonites. I'd much rather fight with them against you than I would to lead your army. But he didn't respond like that. Down in verse 9. Jephthah answered, suppose you take me back to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them to me. Will I really be your head? And the elders of Gilead replied, the Lord is our witness, we will certainly do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them, and he repeated all of his words before the Lord in Mizpah. And then he does the negotiations with the Ammonites, and basically it doesn't work out. They go to battle. Jephthah makes this vow, though. Maybe in a moment of weakness. It's really one of those things, you read the story and what is this all about? Why would he do something like that? Because this is what he does, down in verse 31. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of my door of my house to meet me when I return from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. And they went into battle, and the Israelites were very successful. They overran the country. They drove out the people in 20 cities. They defeated the army, and then Jephthah goes back home after the battle, and he approaches his house, and what comes out of his house? His daughter. Talk about a dilemma. What are you going to do? Have you ever had things happen in your life, said things in your life that you wish you hadn't had happened, or said things you wish you wouldn't have said? To me, that's the whole story of Jephthah. Many times we let the past dictate our future. Or things that we've done in the past, we just can't get out of that. On more than one occasion, I've talked with people, and they talk about how they were raised as a child, and they could never get over that. Maybe they were abused. Maybe there was just some things that went on that they could never leave behind. Sometimes it's decisions we make ourselves and things we do, and we think, oh man, if I would just never have done that, life would have been so much different. And I'm sure that Jephthah, when he saw his daughter comes out of the house, he says, what was I thinking? Well, I hope that you'll read the whole chapter on your own, because his daughter basically says, Dad, what you said, what you made as a vow to the Lord, you need to keep that vow, and I will submit myself to that. And then Jephthah honors the vow he made to God. And then it says he went on and he ruled for 6 years as the judge of Israel. What in the world can we get from that? You may come up with some different things than I do. Here's 3 things I want you to think about when it comes to Jephthah. First, Jephthah understood who would see him through. He understood, he knew who would give him the victory. Because in verse 9, when they first came to him and encountered him and said, suppose I go back and fight with you. He said, and the Lord gives them to me. Now that jumped out to me because he didn't say, well, yeah, I am a mighty warrior, and if I go back, I'm going to win. He doesn't say that at all. He says, if I go back and the Lord gives them to me, right up front, he recognizes that if he's going to have victory, it's going to be the Lord's victory. It's not going to be his. It's going to be something that God does, not something that he accomplishes. And I think that's an important thing to remember. A second thing I think we can learn about Jephthah is that he had a public relationship with God. Where do you get that from? Well, in verse 11, after they say, yeah, we want you, he says, yeah, but anyway, verse 11. So Jephthah went to the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over him. It's a public deal, all right? And this is what it says. And he repeated all of his words before the Lord in Mizpah. In other words, he's saying, I am not just saying this for you guys that really didn't like me very much. I'm not just saying that for you to hear. I am saying this before the Lord. I am accountable to God. And I think he had a public relationship with God. It wasn't just a private thing that he said to these elders that, well, you're right, okay, we'll do that, you do that, yeah, all right, let's shake on it and we'll go out and do the... He brought it in front of the entire community. He said, here's the deal. We don't know exactly what he says, but it implies if we're going to do this, God's going to do it. And we're committed to him. And then a third thing, and this is the tough part, he kept his vow that he made to God no matter how tough it was. What about today? Where are we at? Let me share these thoughts. If we were to look at the life of Jephthah and apply it to us, I guess I would first say, don't let your past determine your future. Verse 39, or I'm sorry, he was the first one. Remember that? Won't include these on my resume, son of a prostitute, outcast from the family. he could have let those things turn him against God. Instead, it appears, and we don't know the story, we don't know the backstory of this. Because on the next chapter, he talks about his relationship with God, some also. But he, somewhere along the way, turned to God instead of away from God. And he became a leader of people. I don't know what you have in your past that's kept you from being all that you could be. But it's encouraging to me that God looks more at your heart than God looks more at your heart than He does your past. You may have something in your past you wish wasn't there. You're not alone. All of us are there at some point or other in our lives. But literally thank God for this verse. Listen to it. Psalm 103. It's up there in reference. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is His love for those who fear Him. Now that fear is not, I'm going to hide from God. That fear is a respect, an honor, a bowing down before Him. So high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is His love for those who fear Him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has He removed our transgressions from us. How far is the east from the west? Well, it's an infinite. It's one of those things that can't be measured. It's impossible to measure how far the east is from the west. Because as I stand right here, this is east, this is west. You might say, well, that's only 6 feet. Well, if I go over here, well, no, it's 12 feet if I start. How far is east? It's just a way of saying there's no way to measure how far He has removed our transgressions, the junk in our lives, from us. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty thankful for that. Because we'd be in a mess without that. Second thing I think that we can take away with this story is this. Faithfulness to God needs to be at the forefront of our lives. Like I said, when the leaders came to him and asked him to do that, the first thing he did was mention God. And when he went before the people and made the deal, he mentioned God. He included God in his life, in his daily walk, in the decisions he made. And I think that's so important. Now, is your faith a private thing? Yes, I'm not saying it's not. In fact, we all need a personal relationship with God. And I've learned over the years that different people have different relationships and they express that in different ways. And it's easy sometimes to look at someone and say, well, they're not very religious because I never see them do this or I never see them do that. When I was in Bible college, I struggled with, you live in a dorm. And you see some of these guys in the dorm, and you're thinking, they're wanting to go into the ministry? You've got to be kidding me. And then the only thing I ever learned in psychology class, or at least ever remembered in college, in this psychology class, is I was wrestling with that one day, and the teacher, Denise Gamoff was her name, said, you cannot judge your relationship to God and compare it to someone else's relationship with God. Yeah. That makes difference. That's true. So, is your relationship private? Yeah, it is personal. It should be that way. But also, we forget the other side of that sometimes to also make it public. To let God be the person that we give credit to and glory to and give Him thanks for all these things. That we go to Him as the first option rather than the last option. I had a guy come up to me one time and said, would you pray for my wife? I've tried everything else. I might as well try that. Let's let God be at the forefront. When Jephthah was faced with the decision, God was immediately in the conversation. Privately, among the elders of Gilead, publicly, among the people there. Well, third thing, and I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but God's love remains with you no matter what. God's love remains with you. Jephthah stayed true to his commitment no matter what. Even though I don't understand it, even though you probably don't understand it, I don't understand why the whole thing with his daughter happened, why it was there and all of those things, other than I know that God had His hand over them all. And it reminded me of God's sacrifice that He made for us. Because to be honest with you, that doesn't make sense either. Why in the world would God send His one and only Son to die a terrible, cruel death on the cross so that you and I can have forgiveness and a promise of eternal life? That doesn't make sense. But as Paul says in Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, you see at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Guess who the ungodly is? You and me. Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous man, though for a good man someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates His own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And because of that promise, our past does not determine our future. Our future is determined by our commitment to the one who died for us. There are a lot of stories of people overcoming things in their life and coming out in the end. You've heard some of them. Abraham Lincoln, you've heard all the elections he lost and how he went from the log cabin to the White House. Great story. Michael Jordan, maybe you're familiar with this or not, great basketball player. He was cut from his high school basketball team because he wasn't good enough. And went on to win 6 NBA championships with the Chicago Bulls. Well, I ran across a story this week that I'd never heard of before, and someone had made reference to it, and I've kind of gotten the habit of, I always check these stories out before I tell them just to make sure they're true. Not that preachers ever take something from someone else and it's not true, but yeah, they do in illustration sometimes. So I want to give you the true story. And ran across this story by the guy by the name of James Braddock. Never heard of him before. James Braddock was at one time in the mid-20s a successful amateur boxer. He didn't win all of his bouts. He won about 20 of them by knockout. And in 1926, he was in a fight, broke his right hand, which was the hand he punched with. And then the stock market crashed and things just went south, not only for him, but for so many people. He had to give up boxing so that he could go down, and he worked in the docks of New Jersey to keep food on the table. Had 3 children and a wife, and he was trying to support them. And then one day, out of a blue, someone comes up to him and says, "Hey, they need someone to fight this guy tonight." They had a number 2 contender for the heavyweight championship was fighting someone, and his partner, the guy he was going to fight, backed out of it or got sick. I can't remember what it was. And they honestly got this guy just to fill a spot, and because they just needed someone that another guy could beat up. All right. James Braddock says he'll do it because he was going to get paid for it. He would do whatever he wanted to do. And he went in and he fought this fight. And to the great surprise of everyone, he knocked the guy out in the 3rd round of that boxing match. And then he went on to win another fight. And he became kind of the inspiration for all those that were down and out, struggling every day just to live. On June 13th, 1935, in New York City, Braddock had the opportunity to fight the heavyweight champion of the world. Guy's name was Max Bauer. He was a 10-1 underdog. No one gave him a chance to even get through the first round with this guy. The fight went 15 rounds. And the judges unanimously gave the fight to James Braddock. His opponent really didn't even train for the fight. But here's what Braddock said about the fight. He said, "I'm training for a fight, not a boxing contest or a clowning contest or a dance," he said. "Whether it goes 1 round or 3 rounds or 10 rounds, it will be a fight and a fight all the way. And when you've been through what I've had to face in the last 2 years, a Max Bauer or a Bengal tiger, either one looks like a house pet. He might come at me with a cannon and a blackjack, but the fight will be a picnic compared to what I've had to face." And he goes on to win the fight, becomes the champion for 2 years. 2001, he is inducted to the Boxing Hall of Fame. 2005, there's a movie made of him, and the movie's titled Cinderella Man. What's the point? You may never be initiated into the Hall of Fame. And you may never have a movie made about your life. But God has something much greater for you. Eternal life. For at just the right time, Christ died for us. God doesn't give up on you. Let's not give up on Him. Let's pray.